When they came to Ulthor, they rode straightway to the king's palace in the highlands, and without delay were granted audience, though the king himself were not there. There to the royal court they set forth the work of the sea battle, and of all that had led thereto. And even as they spoke, tidings were brought them about the king. The spirit had roused him from the oaken throne, and just days ago was marching forth in righteous fury to finally drive off the usurper Sinistox. So was that black prince expelled from his pretended dominion in Irbath, fleeing with all haste, and thus was restored the Grand Duchess to her lawful seat. For Sinistox's own sworn knights, the Worm Lords, had wisely forsaken him when they learned that he could no longer furnish the berserker brew steeped in the cordulant mushroom, the brew which Vorthragna alone had supplied. His remnant host could not thus endure a siege, and they fled with a few hostages. To Hercanth they sailed, seeking refuge with Warcunder Balecrown, dread admiral and vassal to the ghost queen of Ashkehon. The Bladetongue made strayway to Yerbath, where they laid before the king all that they knew of Sinistox's remaining strength, how scarce 200 sworn knights who yet cleaved to him, and more besides of Warcunder Balecrown, his necromancies, the tally of his ships and soldiers, his engines of war, and the ordering of his legions. All this was found in the captured charts and scrolls. Perilothran had enough presence of mind to slip into Admiral Warcunder's own quarters during the sea battle. With such counsel the king made ready a mighty host, both by land and sea, and within the month marched upon Hercanth to lay siege to Ashkehon. Yet the enemy fled by night. The king of Ultherings followed hard upon them, even unto the northern plains of Arahom, and there overtook them upon the plain of Gederon, that blood-stained land doomed for the meeting of hosts, of which bards yet sing throughout Whitehawk. Of how the Duchess spoke with Sinistox upon the broken tower before the last battle. It is told that, in the days immediately before the final mustering of hosts, the noble Duchess of Irbath craved speech once more with her estranged brother Sinistox, by means not fully set down in the chronicles, and with the silent aid of one dutiful knight, who would not ever after speak of it, she passed at dusk through the outer marches of Gederon, famous field of battle, and came unto the shattered watch-tower that stood solitary above the grey plain. There, that rebel prince of Ulthor had been seen to return so as to view all the plain, and would walk in troubled vigil. The tower rose like a dark-robed sentinel, lone and sombre, upon a hillock, its crown yet whole but worn, and much destruction having been dealt to the lower masonry, with the parapet blasted apart in several sections. The wind sometimes moaned through the cracks, for it stood edging a plain whose turf was soaked with the blood of countless armies throughout the ages. Westward the plain and rolling hills lay wide and dimming, patched with the marsh mists, and far-off glimmering of the campfires of his enemy. The sun declined in the west, growing pale behind the autumn clouds, the sky burning like gold above, and then slowly fading into violet. Upon that high platform of the tower's top, Sinistox stood alone, cloaked in sable, with his draconid armor beneath. He gazed not downward nor above, but across the expanse that stretched out below him, the prize of victory, else a defeat in eternal shame, and long had he awaited and prepared for the coming day. Outward across the troubled world he surveyed, including the kingdom which he loved and sought to correct. He knew the soft steps of his sister as she ascended the old creaking spiral stair, and he did not turn to greet her, but continued the contemplation of things to come. She paused her advance at the threshold when she reached the open floor of that roof, and stood still waiting for him to turn round. Yet he remained still. The wind took at her mantle, white and silver. She wore no armor or helm, as she came privately seeking parley as was arranged, and only the king of Ulthor had wit of it. A gentle wind moved about. Her long hair streamed in it like a dark veil. She stepped forth and grasped the broken parapet, looking upon the horizon with him. Yet still he turned not to her. Thus for a little space together they kept silent. Outward gazing, at length he said, "You should not have come. The paths are perilous, and the eyes of my captains are everywhere. Had any seen you climb hither, ere nightfall you would have been taken, and have forfeit all your design, nay, even your life. And yet I stand here," she answered, her voice low but clear. "Peril is no new guest to the children of our house, nor would I let thee to go into destruction without one attempt to bring you back, words in charity spoken." Sinistox smirked. "Well, the monks taught you. I would even laugh at such a church-worn teaching on charity, were we in less serious times. Who doth want of charity be not I, but the realm's other lords, all of whom you know, knights who say that they know, but know not, and neither do you they know, nor your goodness, else they would have dissuaded you from opposing me. Why trust you these men, these clever dogs, who would lay claim to share your seat? They do not hold you in esteem as I. You should have joined with me. Instead, now all style me traitor, oath-breaker, and usurper." She answered him, "Yet thou hast took my throne and claimed father's, and would subjugate more besides. Yet even this cannot keep me from loyal affection and goodwill to mine own brother, to the point that I seem the fool. And 'tis true what you say, that the monks taught me well, namely, never lose hope for any beloved, no matter how profoundly erring. Still the law must judge you, and my love has no reach there, for you will not be persuaded. You, then, I must bemourn, as I am unable to scorn." Then for the first time that hour he turned his gaze to her, and the dim rays of the setting sun cast upon his features once fair, now at once hardened and hopeful, as a youthful hope filled with the fire of resolution, but a chiseled hardness of one long having pain enduring. "Not yet in the grave am I," he said slowly, without anger. "So weep for me not. Driving you from Yerbath as I did, sister, I do regret it. But it had to be done for the good of the realm. So instead, weep for yourself and all your friends. For if I am defeated in this final contest, there will be none left to seek freedom for Ulthor." "You speak of being free," she said, "but you will not heed the one offering something better this very night. Do not speak of some higher cause to make excusal. I know your heart. It is not consumed fully in darkness and anger. Come, relent, and be reconciled with us. Let your heart be softened. This is how you shall prove your love for Ulthor. I will be chastened no further, dear sister. I did learn a penitent freedom at the margin of the world, father's half measure, exile for my companions and I. Indeed, fain was he to measure out strict justice upon his own, too weak to execute me, and mercifully end a defeated foe as he should. That is also cause to do this. 'Tis a lesson for him. Again, you mistake mercy for weakness, brother. The wind rose stronger then, and through the gap in the parapet, a scatter of loosened stones went clattering into the unseen depth below, for they were very high above earth. She unintendedly stepped nearer the brink, and he reached out as if by instinct, and caught her arm. "Have care," he said. "The fall is long." "Longer yet will the fall of a kingdom," she answered gently, withdrawing not from his grasp. "Look there, Sinistox. See how the smoke of thy forges darkens the lowlands, and how the folk go bowed beneath the burden of thy war. This was not the inheritance given us by our fathers, nor is it the freedom of heaven, and not mercy to our land." His hand fell away. "You talk much of mercy, sister," he said. "Our fathers left us weakness and servitude to the nobles, who now by wealth doth control things. They taught us kneel when we should have ruled. I have merely taken back the strength that was squandered in prayer and hesitation. Order shall come again to Ulthor, but it shall be an order born of iron, not incense. Order without grace from above. It is an order whose name is despair," she said. "Thou hast mistaken the earthly throne for the judgment seat of God." He smiled faintly, though in doing was little mirth. "My own native talents be grace enough from above. The heavenly throne granted me them from birth. We need not slavishly pray and bow and scrape suing for divine favor. Had Father himself given me his favor in days bygone, I would have conquered for him all the realms that gird Ulthor's white shores, and so made him Emperor of Whitehawk. Yet he would rather feign humble servitude. A grand life we missed. Yet tomorrow I shall make up for it. It will be a day unforgettable, when hosts move at a lifted hand, when fortresses bow their gates at a word. There is a music in it, sister, deeper than any psalm." "And yet it is the psalms that endure," she answered, "when the captains are dust." They stood again in silence. The last rim of the solar disk sank wholly beneath the western horizon, and a single pale star trembled visible above the darkening plain. Far off there came the low murmur of mustering legions, like the far rumble of a gathering storm, great and terrible. "Join me, my sister. We shall spare the life of our father, for we shall tell all the world that his mind is gone, and he will be cared for. But we will rule as brother and sister, and our kingdom shall heal." At length she said more softly, "I cannot. I swore an oath of faith, and of truth. She drew from her person the bloody scarf of Phaethar, which she ever after had kept with her as a relic, and she turned it over gently, running it through her fingers. To myself and to all before God, must I be true? 'Tis honestly felt, without you my life had not known many good and noble things, Parrhasius. And now Thalfin too, and his magic is gone. I beg you come back with me, not as prince nor conqueror, but as brother. Lay down this bitter burden, which your heart can no longer bear. See how divided art thou within thine own self. The king would yet receive thee. I would plead thy cause upon my knees. For a moment his face wavered, as though some inner gate had opened, and a forgotten tenderness shone through. You know that is impossible, he murmured, for I must also be true to myself. You speak with the tongue of childhood, as when we walked together in the orchards and thought the world secure. That world is gone. I have seen too much of the abyss to pretend again to innocence. Then stand not against light, she said softly. Continue not this alliance with darkness. If return thou cannot, then at least cease to rend what may yet be healed. But he shook his head. It be too late for that. The die has been cast. I have chosen my path, and the powers that I have summoned will not be gainsaid. On the morrow shall we meet again upon the plain of war, not upon a tower in twilight fading, but in a far better place, the red dawn amid clashing spear, where deeds of immortal valor will show forth, regardless of who lives or dies, or who be right and who wrong. Aye, and by that measure will we learn whose hope was but folly. There shall I meet thee, she said, not for hatred, nor for valor, but sorrowing. God judge between us. So let it be, he replied. The evening star above burned steadier now, and the wind fell suddenly to a hush, as though earth itself listened. He drew his cloak about him and stepped back toward the stair. Farewell, my sister, he said. All things must end. If Father has the day, pray for me, if you must. But wait not for my return, and neither assume heaven will forgive me. I shall pray, she answered, and I shall not cease. Thus they parted upon the broken height, each bearing away a wound unseen, and the tower stood solitary under the first cold lights of night, keeping in its shattered stones the echo of words that neither sword nor time could wholly silence. Prince Sinistox would finally meet his demise the next day upon the plain, as he watched the battle from one of the many minor forts. The son of the king had refused sonship in spirit, for the relentless mentality had infected and so corrupted him that he would never accept, instead of the throne itself, the princely gift which his father had reserved for him. Thus, in spite, was he contorted inwardly with ambition unfulfilled. In these years, the vanity of his glory-seeking had consumed him wholly, and thereof sprang all the ruin of his life, and this became the final catastrophe of his freedom. So Sinistox Banelord stood watching upon the plain of Gederon, watching the utter defeat of his forces, grasping his tormented head, and Norgonce, chaplain of the Amoric knights, saw him from far, and with many others prayed mercy be upon him. For Thragna, weakened by temporary capture of the Bladetongue, was not in attendance. She could not weave deceiving magic or lend the worm-held knights any berserker fury, and she doth fear above all to stand in battle before one like Christ the King, from whose mouth issues a double-edged blade, his tongue of truth cleaving the false angels in twain. And this especially is so when a mortal king bears the image of Our Lady Mother in battle, as did bear the rightful sovereign that day. The King of Ulthor, of Amuric royalty, foremost in Maceonid lineage, carries her likeness most dreadfully unto the wicked enemy, stunning them. Though aged, that grave king was terrible to behold, and certainly the craven many-headed beast could never endure such sight. So learning of this danger, she hid herself far off, nursing the wound Urius had dealt her, and reckoned nothing of her allies' ending. To the Golden Mermaid in Yerbath, the Bladetongue headed back in days afterward. There they found Rohorst, bound still to his chair and unable to walk. They told him of all they wrought upon the beast upon his behalf, all their transgressing trek through the torrid volcano, how they had humbled her, bound her, and put her to shame. They told him of all the grief they dealt out to the evil thing on his behalf. By the whitewood table with tankards in hand, Norgonce stood and recounted their trials with mirth and gravity mingled, and how the Almighty had aided them, that their fallen oath brothers might not be forgotten. Then Rohorst spoke. "Tell us, Norgonce, and leave nothing unsaid. What by heaven or hell didst thou behold upon the plain of Gederon? I have heard many accounts, some varying, but which one is true history? For all sound to me but legend. Ghosts I've seen before, flitting about shadows in dungeons dark. But how is it that the lifeless corpses of fallen warriors could find willful force? How could they march upon the battlefield in formation, treading the good earth in broad daylight?" Then Norgonce lowered his voice and answered fully. A dreadful sight it was, Rohorst. Armored phantoms in black array, entombed for centuries long, rode again upon the broad earth. Unreal it may sound, yet real enough to those crushed beneath their splashing chariot wheels. We named them the Legion of the Dead, and over them rules not just an admiral, but a grand Lich King, Warcunder Balecrown. Through the blue-shadowed night he rode with his host upon skeleton mounts, horned helms upon their skulls, their eyes alight with hellfire. Hear now the long-lasting lore on that Lich King. He sought the Vale Castle Ashkehon upon the misty marches of that same name, a place where old rumor avers there lay hidden draughts of immortal Nepenthe, by which the dead might forget utterly the sorrows of their sinful lives upon earth. For these kings were men most wicked, and in death they were denied all rest. The worm-ridden minds and bodies of evil men were these, the last of the Atlansir, who in ancient days made war upon the Hyksoth for dominion over Ash-Ki-Hon, some 200 passings of Kalduin since. The Atlansir had once been a mighty host, cruel, disciplined, merciless, yet driven from the realm of Atalur, and afterward seizing lands 'neath the mountains of bordering Herticum. It is said by some that they sprang indeed from that ancient Atlantean stock, which spread like a plague over the young earth before the great deluge, for they were orderly, tireless, and terrible to withstand. The Atlansir held that in their veins ran the purest blood of that elder race of Atlanteans, far above common men, and that by unspeakable destiny they were appointed to rule all the wide world. Thus, they would to enslave all nations beneath their will. They worshipped gods of war and spirits fallen, and in their temples they offered them the living blood of human beings. Only total war might appease their blood-soaked altars, and they slaughtered 1,000 captives at the slightest whim, the flames devouring their flesh. So began of ancient times the bloody War of Horns. The evil-minded Atlansir were defeated. Even those Atlansir who surrendered were executed by the victors for their unholy crimes. They were buried together in great number beneath the Vale Castle of Ash-Ki-Hon, without rite or prayer, as the annals attest. And so centuries passed, and they were forgotten, for all realms and kingdoms are but clay. Then, in the year that blessed King Sholsamur of Arvad passed from this life, strange reports arose from Ash-Ki-Hon. Men spoke of hauntings, of armed skeletons that had risen from beneath the earth and now trod the open land. They had begun to harry the villages, burn dwellings, and plunder. At first, the nobles of Herticum believed it to be some weird tale or prank, for it was long held that such ensorcelled hosts belonged only beyond the great frontier, the works of banished enchanters of elder days. This unholy menace was no magician's trick, but the work of Warcunder Balecrown himself, an infernal lich that had traversed the abysmal gaps of hell from the fiery halls of condemned souls. The attacks became more and more alarming, and the army began destroying whole towns. It was at this time that Prince Sinistox heard tidings of their growing might, and being pressed by siege at Yerbath, he fled by ship with his remnant wormlords to Hircanth, and there made dread alliance with the dead. The ghastly legion at last drove the Hyksoth from their own land. The nobles of that people appealed unto Ulthor, and the king sent forth an army of 4,000 clerics and paladins. The Bladetongue were numbered among them, for we had already crossed swords with these enemies upon the sea, and both the king of Ulthor and the Duchess of Yerbath required our counsel. Tell me, friends, what profit is it to wound flesh that already is lifeless? For the legion would only march by moonless night. 5 days we followed their spoor northward. That unholy host sought the colder reaches of Arahom and the plain of Gederon, for chill preserves dead sinew and bone from decay, making them harder to hew apart. Moreover, They hope to draw aid from the Northing of Zabel, Archdruid of the world, and from his troll hosts of Horgoth and Bolg. Yet little aid came. The Northing sent to Sinistox no more than a single company of Scathok, strange gargoyle-like creatures, unruly and ill-obedient, stronger allies, trolls and hobgoblins, he withheld. For such beings love not the company of the undead, nor will they fight beside them. Thus the messengers returned to Sinistox upon Gederon with denial. This was bitter news, for even the fallen arcanes of Nystall had refused him alliance. So now the prince was left with his but 200 remaining worm-lords, and the bizarre but terrible Scathok. Yet even then, he would not bend. He might have surrendered and sued the king for mercy upon his knees, and mercy he would surely have found. But his knees would not bend. So we encamped upon the plain of war, that wide moor lying like a moat about an abandoned Regulian fort. Sinistox was driven into, a corner and cut off from supply. There he chose to stand, together with the Lich King, upon the plain of Gederon. There we made camp in the mysterious mists summoned by the Lich. We looked for a clear day, but the mists did not break. We waited until the Feast of Burning Yeast. Roger of Gorhold, a mighty paladin, commanded us. We arrayed our lines in vast order, mailed knights in scaly armor, clerics, archers, and a forest of pikes. Our clerics stood robed in sacred vesture, awaiting a favoring wind, or just a breeze in the right direction. I asked my lord the Archbishop what might we do if the holy prayers and incenses failed to abolish the evil horde. To me, with grim aspect, he spoke. If the right prevail not and no breeze come, then must the clerics break the bones of the living dead, or burn them, and cease not the havoc until the dawn. The Archbishop of Yerbath, brightly armored in scaly plate, from on his mount before the drawbridge of the ruined fort, reads aloud the summons of exorcism in the ancient Regulian tongue.
Exorciso vos nequissimi letrones, qui hominum abia Jerusalem irico. A felicitate innocentia a peccati insidia. Descendentum despuliastis, plagis impositis, sedi vivum reliquistis. Exorciso vos per piissim salutarum, Iesum Christum, qui per incarnationis unitatem misero homini approprians eligavit vulnera eius, et visibilibus et sacramentis.
Then there is heard the ghostly war horn of the enemy, blown long as a decade of beads, sounding like the crack of doom. Slowly the ground yawns, and forth they come, a vast host of bone and decay, mounted upon armored steeds undead. They bear the ornate mail of elder days, and roy dreadfully from the pearled mist that shrouds the land. Warcunder Balecrown has summoned up his companions of old, the Atlansir, who lay still for 100 centuries upon the plain of some forgotten battle, forgotten by all save him.
Watanaya Chanchandriya Puntoya Punchokoya Punnotoya Tanakya Puntidaya Tanushumua Atanea Punnaidana Tana.
Then does our cavalry of vowed knights, 100 strong, charge across the moor, led by Roger of Gorehold, and after them press the footmen and bowmen, their bows bent, their shafts tipped with blessed fire. Doomed were those good men, never again to behold the light of day. They vanish into the misted moat, and we hear only the clangor of steel and the cries of battle. Long it lasted, an hour or more. Terrible the shrieks, dreadful the hissing of Scathok, and still we could see nothing. Orders came from the king that we should hold our ground and wait. We deemed it near a crime to stand idle and not rush forth to the aid of our fellow lords. To obey the king in that hour was the hardest thing I have ever known. My master, the Archbishop, whose visage had grown the more crestfallen, him I besought to send me into the squares of battle and aid the knights that were fallen. But stern was his reply. "Heed not the cries, Norgonce," said he. "It was commanded we wait for the horde to sally unto us, for they have taken no slight punishing from the king's vassals, and the clergy must finish the work." Out of the dim fog banks came some wounded knights, staggering and steeped in gore, uttering cries, "Too many! Though they somehow bleed, they do not retreat." Of that noble company which made the first charge, the greater part were never seen alive again, and among them Roger of Gorehold himself. Then remained it to the bishops, the clerics, and the remnant of the host to take the contest into their own hands. Finally, by the grace of God, a favorable but faint breeze came. The thurifers set ablaze the huge tripods of incense. Thick clouds of sanctified smoke rolled forth. Then the ghastly host came on in full charge out of the swirling mists. But they reeled and faltered when the incense drifted into their bony nostrils. We closed with them upon a frozen place, where a narrow stream crept out from the marshy moat. It was during a great lull in the fray, after we had burned and broken many ancient battle lords, unsightly and undead, that we began to turn the battle. The work of severing the half-frozen limbs was difficult and seemed not to end. Yet did the frenzy again favor the undaunted enemy, for the wind shifted against us. Too many they were, and they came ever on. Men fell at our sides, and we were pressed and ringed about, driven back upon a little rise of ground amid the marsh. We found ourselves beset on all sides in a little island that rose up in a marshy place about that moor. It was then that I saw him. Warcunder Balecrown came forth, the great lich of horror, like an enveloping shadow, riding upon a mighty black nightmare. The whole host fell silent as we gazed upon this soul figure. He drew drew near our battle square, the hoofbeats of that dread mare thundered like doom, and flame issued from her nostrils. Upon her flanks were bound the heads of his recent kills, tied by the hair. Among them, Gederon, and other men whom I myself had known. Then advancing, he rose above us, like a giant of the elder wars, black-armored and dreadful to behold. Upon his accursed brow was set an iron crown, wherein baleful stones burned dim as coals beneath ash. And dismounting, for the horror steed would not cross the shallows, he took up from his saddle a spiked warhammer, and fell upon our ranks with grievous force. None might withstand his onset. There my lord the Archbishop was sore smitten upon the helm by that proud and dreadful wight, so that the iron was bent and the blood ran down his brow. Yet his wits were not taken from him, and going a little space he fell upon his knee, but still had strength to strive. One Sir Furcall of Mokum, a valiant and most devout lord, beloved among the knights and father of many children, lay near at hand, sore wounded, and was struggling to rise when a dark volley of arrows came hurtling upon. The Archbishop nearby perceived the peril, and yet knowing the life still in him, gathering what strength remained, hurled himself before Mokum, shielding him, but receiving the storm of aerial death in his own body. Thereafter, one of the great sergeants of the enemy noticed how he was struck hard, but remained alive, and so went to make an end of him, driving a cruel spear through his hip, and pinning him to the earth beneath. And the Archbishop was held fast, but did not fall. There he stood, transfixed in agony, yet not full deprived was his strength, and his battle hand was free. So by the divine power given him in that hour, he lifted his arm, and with his mace struck off the head of that ghoulish knight. Still standing, upheld only by the spear that nailed him, he raised his voice and exhorted the knights and lords to finish the battle, speaking of the life to come, and of the reward laid up for those who die in holy contest. Press on, my sons. Hold the field. Fear not them that slay the body. The judge standeth at the gate, and blessed are the righteous who fall in the strife. And then his voice failed, and the last of his strength was spent, his head bowing, and his hands loosened from the haft of his weapon. And so, slipping from the cruel iron that had held him, he sank down softly upon the trampled earth, and spake no more. Norgonce himself rides forth under escort to recover the body of the Archbishop, which lay amid other lifeless burning heaps. Yet finds he the ground sodden, and all alike deep in the bloody mire. As Norgonce labored in the mud, the noble Duchess of Yerbath, clad in full shining plate, rode forth upon her white steed to guard him. But instead, she found herself set upon by Prince Sinistox, her own brother. Brandishing her sword, Gam, wondrously wrought of silver and steel, and luminous with devout design. The Grand Duchess cried aloud that victory is close. The King of Ulthor also has appeared, bearing upon his back the image of the Virgin. And man of years he was, his long white locks streaming in the breeze, clad in but leather armor, yet armed with the famous golden snake bow, whose flaming tips light up the foe whenever he shouts his mysterious war cry and accosts the enemy with well-aimed shafts. Would that I had borne the war club Mithrohan on that day, yet was it not appointed unto me. For God himself had chosen his champions. Still the Duchess and Sinistox contend, neither able to strike the other down. My mount found me and sauntered hither, and I drew myself back upon my saddle, facing the enemy and readying the Archbishop's mace, and then I addressed the ghastly Warcunder Balecrown. Accursed soul, behold now what was the golden scepter of God's mercy, which thou didst reject while yet alive. That same scepter is become this iron rod, to break thy arrogance, and cast thee again into the fire prepared for thee. The devious Lich King reined back his nightmare. Then he answered with insolent speech, "Think not, insulting church peon, our gods the same. The power that cast me down and envied my victories shall not see me kneel till the last day. Rather shall the beauteous shadows of the dark gods rise anew, refreshed by the blood of Ares is slain." So saying, he wheels about, and both horses flanked. We exchange blows, rider to rider. Hard struck our both, and backward fall upon the frost-bound plain. My frame was shocked by the wraith's unearthly strength, and for a time I could not rise. Yet others came and raised me up, and then on foot we make a furious engagement, myself closing again with the Lich King in deadly combat. My shining breastplate now severely dented, though I strike with all my might. My blows avail little against the bony frame of the adversary. Meanwhile, Prince Sinistox and the Grand Duchess, his own sister, yet strove together. You might have thought he really wished to kill his sister, for he fought sternly using no shield, attacking with the sword Elmethodon in one hand and a dagger in the other. The clangor of battle ebbed around them, and men drew back to behold the duel. Yet even in such heated battle, common sense prevailed. Neither would dare summon upon their soul the curse of Cain, not even the prince in his obsession. So they parted, having dealt only lesser wounds. Thereafter word came that Sinistox, having withdrawn to the rear to direct the legions, standing upon the hill fort, beheld his undead host scattered. Unable to endure the shame of a third defeat, he wept bitterly. Yet soon, in dismay and inward confusion, his speech failed him, and his countenance fell. He neither took to slay himself nor to flee, but stood as one undone within. His will was broken, though his mind yet remained, and the fire of command went out from him. He spoke nothing more, and later would disappear alone into an obscure border town. Thus was lost Sinistox, not for lack of truth, but for refusal of his place within it. For this the king would weep. Thus the ending must be for the perfidious rebel, the mind powerful and seeing much, but the heart nevertheless hardened. Such was the Banelord's doom. Finally, the king himself calls for blessed fire and holy oil, and this has already been prepared in a glass bomb. Carried on a chain and swung against the opponent, it explodes on impact. The undead king, upon seeing this, hisses wildly and withdraws among the remnants of his host. Forth into the filth of devilry we charge, shouting, "Return thou to fire prepared from all eternity." Norgonce swings the flaming bomb by its chain and smites the fiend, who burst forth at once into a leaping blaze. The clergy and monks draw back from the burning horror, reeling, shrieking with voices not recognizable of man, stumbling like a torch among his own, kindling them anew. Nor does the late morning sun withhold his witness. The great lamp beams forth, driving off the Balecrown's mists and shaming the wicked, reminding the undead of God's justice. Unable to endure the light, they withdraw into their burial mounds, or sink again into the places where they had fallen in ancient days, and are stilled. The land we sow with blessed salt, lest ever the wicked rise therefrom again. So at last the battle was won, but what grievous cost to slay again those already slain. So many soldiers gave their lives fighting prideful sin and death incarnate. Among the fallen was counted Urius, son of Jarlath. At least he saw the work harvested that day, all the men whom he fought alongside being righteous and free from the beast's corruption, and all passed with honor before God. 1,200 of Ulthor and Cargiwall lay silent upon the moor, faces at peace beside sword and shield. So did Norgonce narrate the battle of Gederon, and he placed the heirloom sword of Urius on the whitewood table. Then of Urius's last stand he told this. He was overwhelmed by a mass of the mindless enemy on the far bastion of the fort, but he tore apart many before he died with this sacred blade. He hoped and prayed to God that he might die righteously in battle, like his ancestors, and this was granted him, for by such death he glorified God. I, Parry Lothran, have here set down Norgonce's account of that strange and wondrous day, and many other things without which it would not have come to pass. As for the lion-headed angel that had appeared to me in dream when we were encamped within the tower, it had not promised me glory, but return, so that I may chronicle this work that was done. May it never be forgotten, and may some poet, or bard, or learned man of the church one day write it more fully, how the Bladetongue stood and fell with the righteous, and how at evening they returned from the field of war, and how glad they were to hear the shouts of victory in the tents of the just,